which if you have this edition, is book 7, chapter 14. It's not what we're reading for today. I just want to give you a sense of it. It's on page 135. And it's the last three paragraphs on that page. If you have a different edition, it's 1154B20, something like that. In no case, though, is the same thing always pleasant, because our nature is not simple, but also has another element in it, in that we are mortals. As a result, if one of the two is doing something that is contrary to the nature of our other nature, and when the two are equally balanced, what we are doing seems neither painful nor pleasant. For if the nature of some being were simple, the same action would always be most pleasant. Do you remember at the beginning of the Phaedrus, where Socrates says, I don't even know whether I'm a simple thing or a complicated one? That's why the god always enjoys a single simple pleasure. For there are not only, I'll read this, but I don't expect you to just think, oh yeah, I understand that. For there's not only an activity of moving, but also an activity of unmoving. And pleasure is found more in rest than in movement. Change in all things is sweet, as the poet says, because of a sort of wickedness. For just as a wicked human being is an easily changeable one, a nature that needs change is also wicked, since it's neither simple nor decent. Well, I think that the reason I put that at the beginning of the discussion precedes immediately the books on friendship, which we're going to take a look at. And I think the first thought you would have if you read it is, well, that's pretty simple. Why would anybody think that? And what even exactly does it mean? So let's remind ourselves of the picture. And it's the picture of, I say this, a reason to start with Plato and Aristotle on these questions is because their shadow is cast over all of the rest of Western and a lot of non-Western thought as well. Alfred North Whitehead, the famous English and then American philosopher who was a great mathematician too, Whitehead said all of Western philosophy is just a series of footnotes to Plato. And that's an exaggeration, but it's not a wild exaggeration, right? I mean, in a way, you can think, probably he invented the subject. He's probably the first one to use the term philosophia. Certainly the first person to set up what we can think of as a school of philosophy to teach it. And Aristotle was a student and then set up a school of his own. So we want to, one of the reasons to go back is because, well, things are often much simpler at the beginning. And then as they grow, they get incredibly convoluted. It's hard to pull out the parts. And yet the same ideas can be present even so. And so if you kind of see them in a simple, where they're fairly straightforward and simple, it's easier to spot them when you run into them later on. And we ourselves still find these images of ourselves very seductive. Like the idea that, first of all, we're not just animals. You know, we've got a special kind of something, our consciousness or mental life or something that distinguishes us. That we are subject to things like weakness of will, which instantly brings about, as Plato said, the thought that there are two things in conflict, right? One part of us that says, do this, another part says, do that. They're in tension. Just like the two kinds of pleasures that we find in this piece at the end of book 7. You remember St. Paul has the same thing. I find one law in my soul and another in my members. And even though I know that the best thing to do is this, I often don't do it. That's the sort of fallen creature that I am. And so these thoughts, these images persist. And they persist even right up into the present day, where philosophers still find themselves pulled in a kind of bifurcated sort of way between, on the one hand, something they want to call our reason, and then something else that can either be in accord with it or stuck with it or whatever. And ethics itself and thoughts about what the best kind of life is for us including what our love lives should be like, right, are bring to the table a lot of these ideas. And I think part of my endeavor is to undo the ideas. I think they're all, in various ways, false, or at least not true. They have a lot of truth in them, but there is something wrong with them too. And but it's not easy to diagnose exactly what's wrong with them. And in a way, our love lives, our sexual lives, or that whole agglomeration of our erotic lives, poses one of the most interesting areas in which to challenge this kind of idea. Right? Because on the one hand, we know full well that we are like the blue-footed boobies. Right? Mating and reproduction are mammalian activities, nursing and nurturing, getting pregnant, giving birth. These are not things we do because we're angels. Right? It's not like, you know, up in heaven, so to speak, God reproduces this way, right? Or that angels do this. It's rather these are places where, just as with eating, going to the bathroom, we encounter our mammalian, our animal parts, that in us that's like all the other animals. And that raises a real question because, right, one thought would be is that in this part of our life, we are most ourselves, right, we feel this is a place where when we're recognized for ourselves, we engage in this as something deeply a part of us, and yet it doesn't come from our rational part. Our rational selves don't have sex, they don't breed, they don't. So you see in Plato, for example, in the Symposium, an attempt to take over from the biological part of ourselves, from our animal parts. So I keep using that terminology. I don't really know what else to use it. I mean, I know when you see it on, I don't know, no animals permitted on the door, you think, but they're all those animals. All right, there's a way of kind of responding, and yet we get it, right? We know that it doesn't mean us. Right? When we say, is it all right to eat animals? Nobody's thinking, you know, should cannibalism be permitted, right? We make a distinction, but I think that in this part of our lives, as in some others, we encounter how much like the other animals we are. And yet I want to say, here's a place where we're most ourselves, or we most feel that we're identified, or there's something quintessentially human about having an intimate life. And so that's why it's a great place to study, because right here attention is palpable between something that's very central to who we are as human beings, as persons, yet it seems to have a clear place in our mammalian, our animal life. Okay, so you see what goes on though, right? We read that little piece again from the end of Book 7, and you see that Aristotle, like Plato before him, thinks that, like many thinkers, that we are an amalgamation of an animal with a god, with something non-mammalian, non-animal. So in the Christian picture, we're all little chips off the divine block. There's something in us that's not from nature, not an animal, not part of animal life, right, that comes from elsewhere. And that's what we most of all are. So we are actually not animals, right? We're, so to speak, gods, right, embodied in animals, but one day we'll shuffle off these mortal coils. The divine part of us will be free and go to its proper life elsewhere in eternity, where, as far as I know, there won't be any sexual love or erotic love, even though there might be something else. I take it that there are a lot of views about this. I won't elaborate on it. Okay, that's the picture. So now we come to another part, another area where, a bit like in the case of Diotima and the Symposium, where Diotima says there's a kind of reproduction that's not mammalian reproduction. It's not sexual reproduction. Oh, we shouldn't use that term because Plato thinks it is sexual, right? It's just not. It's just not corporeally sexual. I don't know how to say that. It's not pivmo, right? It's not about tabe, it's not it's something else, right? And she tries to persuade us that in having conversations, in developing our minds, in passing on ideas to another person, and enriching them, we're doing something that's, strictly speaking, just the same thing as when we impregnate someone or get pregnant and produce an embryo. Right? Our thoughts are embryonic beings. They're little living, they're not, they're little living things that can grow and develop or be stunted and aborted. They're not anything else. So in a way, she kind of says, you see that great part of our life, the rest of it, right? Actually, real reproduction is not biological reproduction, right? It's not what animals do. Real reproduction is reproduction in what we really are, giving birth to something the same kind as ourselves, but we're not animals, right? We're gods. And giving birth to something the same kind of ourselves is creating another rational being by sowing those seeds of reason in them, let them develop and grow. It's a very seductive picture. So some people have thought it's like this, right? But it's a man usurping part of what is female, quintessentially female reproductive powers, right? So especially feminists recently writing about Plato. So that's really what's going on. It's another part of male hegemony. And perhaps it is that too. It can be that as well as, right, what I'm suggesting, which is that we want to take what's valuable to us, reproduction, intimacy, those things, right? And at the same time, we want to pair them off or peel them off from our animal selves, put them over here in this other part. And you'll see that Aristotle is going to do essentially the same thing with friendship. And I think friendship, so the Greek word for a lover and the Greek word for a friend are essentially the same, philos. Right? So if I wanted to say I love you, I'd say philos, right? I love you. Now, I wouldn't try to use any of the other verbs which would suggest, right, that I wanted to have sex with you or something else. But philos is what you would say to a lover, right, as an expression of your erotic love for them. But it's not like I want to go to bed with you, which one of the other ones would be. So philia, and we want to translate as friendship, and then we want to translate the verb as love, because we don't have a friend verb. I friend you. Well, you can. We do now have one. But you can friend somebody, right? Right. But it's a little strange. Anyway, we want to use love for the verb that expresses friendship, and we often do that by talking about loving our friends and so on. And what Aristotle is going to try to do is to explore this part of our intimate lives, our friendship, or the fact that we need friends, and that friends are one of the best goods in the world, and, right? That one. But he's going to do it in this really weird way. You'll see, by the way, if you haven't already gotten to the end of Book 9, because he sees our need for friends as a problem. It's not, we don't see it as a problem, right? It's good that we need friends, right? Because friends are good, not something you'd want to be without. So you wouldn't want to not have the need for friends, right? You like it. Aristotle sees it a problem. One of the reasons he sees it a problem is that if we were gods, we wouldn't need other people at all. So if we were better, it would be better, so to speak, to be, the more godlike we are, the better. But God doesn't need friends. I mean, the Greek God. Aristotle's version of the Greek God doesn't need friends. He's wholly and completely self-sufficient, right? All he does is think about himself, right? Because he's the best thing in the whole universe, so he thinks about the best thing. And indeed, he just is. That thought thinking itself. Weird stuff. Doesn't matter if you don't get it. Hardly anybody does. Right? It's very strange. But that's what he thinks. And that being doesn't need anything. And the more, and we have a piece of that divine understanding, that divine nous, we have a piece of it. That's why we're able to do geometry, and able to do philosophy, and our ethical beings, because we can actually do the kind of reasoning that nous allows you to do. If we were better, if we were more like God, we wouldn't need friends. And so for Aristotle, there's a set of pressures on friendship, right, that we don't feel. And as a result, his thought about it helps us to see, right, how much we aren't inclined to just buy the picture of, we're little chips off the divine block. Because when we move into the Christian tradition, we encounter, though again, this is much debated and disputed, that when we enter into the Christian tradition, one of the things we think about when we say with St. John that God is love, or with Matthew that the two great commandments are love, is that actually God, the best thing in the universe, is a loving God who needs to love and needs to have other people love him and needs to love them back, and he's needy. And when the Greeks, ancient Greek thinkers, there were still quite a bunch of them around in the 1st century AD, thought about this aspect of Christian religion, they thought it was a joke, right? Because they couldn't understand how the best thing in the world, God, would actually need friends. And the whole idea of God becoming man and all of that stuff, they just thought that was essentially funny, right? They didn't think it was something that any sensible person could take seriously. I think they're wrong about that. But notice that there are two ways to change, right? You can change God so that he gives more like us, or you can change us so we're a bit more like God. But the two stories are going to run in parallel, right? And you can either think God is much more, even if we became gods, we still need friends because God is a loving God, right? Or we could think, no, we wouldn't, in which case, right? So you've got problems either way. One is of making sense of a loving God. The other is of making sense of ourselves as beings that, even though we have a divine bit in us, nonetheless need friends. So that's the context, the setup, the discussion. And I think it's weird enough, at least I hope it is. What it does is it takes our thoughts, our own, the thoughts we just spontaneously have on account, exerts a set of torques on them. And in part, we discover what our own thoughts are by seeing how they respond to those pressures. Right? We think, oh, I see, I don't buy that. Oh, I see what I'm committed to. Oh, I want to give that up. Right? There are a whole, that's one of the reasons it's kind of good to explore this. Okay. So let's start at the beginning of bouquets. And we encounter, I'll just help you to get started with the questioning. We encounter a couple of moves that I think are familiar, or should be, from reading a symposium. Remember, Aristotle studied with Plato for 20 years and read the symposium carefully, and takes up lots of Plato's ideas, changes them around. And one of those ideas is what the proper objects of love are. Right? What engages love? So, right, right, just as a nice, really good smelling dinner can encourage you to eat, what does that to your love or friendship? Plato tells us it's beauty. We're responding to beauty in one or other of its many forms. What does Aristotle tell us? What are the proper objects of love for Aristotle?
Yeah, yeah, and this is something I wanted to ask a question on anyway.
Yeah.
Is that
I mean, not just you in particular would have a question, but that anyone would have a question about.
Yeah, it's that so when you talked earlier about beauty, in the symposium, it's like a third, what the true love strives for is a third thing. But here, he says, someone who loves must necessarily be a self-lover, and the love that they have for someone else. I know there's two things that I wondered about, because he says one thing it's one who loves wants the best things for oneself, and the best person loves himself because they would only want good things. But then the other thing, there's this kind of notion that someone has.
Before you're going in a direction that we're going to want to go on, but you're not answering the question, right? So the question is, what engages love for Aristotle in the way that beauty does for Plato?
Didn't he say kind of three different things? There was one that was kind of recognizing the beauty in another person.
Yeah.
I think that was the second one. The first one was recognizing some kind of utility,
Yeah.
something like I would say like friendship, convenience.
Yeah.
If you have something in common. But the third one, the one that you said was the greatest, was more selfless. It was a love about the goodness of a person. It was sharing the kind of ideals that would help both people become better, and not only recognize something that you like in the other person just because you like it.
Yeah, so you picked out two, right? One is recognizing the goodness of, so it's you're responding to the goodness, or the virtue, as Aristotle says, the moral goodness of another person. We'll talk a little bit about that. The other is utility, convenience, as you put it, which is quite right. There's something that this person can do for you that you want. And there's one more.
Pleasure.
Yeah, so notice, right, there are three things we go for in life, right? And three reasons that we form attachments to others. One is they're a source of pleasure to us. Right? We enjoy them. Right? In all the ways you can enjoy another person. That's good. Another is they're really useful. They can scratch your back, you can scratch theirs. There's a lot that you can do for each other. They help you in life by providing those kinds of services, right? And the other final one is they're good people. They're excellence. Their virtue, their arete attracts you. Right? So we have three kinds of friendship tracking the three kinds of good. So let's just take a little look at the aretes over there. So arete, virtue, or excellence, is often, because of this, is often thought to be, whatever that means, a moral notion, part of ethics, right? And one of the things that I think is important is, if that's right, then your Plato's notion of beauty, that you're attracted to beauty, which allows you, for example, to think of things like, well, the beauty of a body all the way to the beauty of political arrangements, theories, mathematical stuff, huge. It's just the vast sea of beauty. There's a lot of them, right? And it's not all of one kind, right? So the beauty of a body, though it's beauty, is quite different from the beauty of a mathematical theory or a political organization or a nice bit of philosophy. It's different. But if I think of virtue as moral, and Aristotle has, as we'd say, moralized the notion of love or friendship. He said it's moral goodness that attracts love. Right? So that would be a big step, right? Because I think that would be strange. That would be if you like, a kind of torque exercise on our own thought, because I don't think we think that love is sparked by moral excellence in that way, right? So we might think, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you know Oscar Wilde. I think everyone should read everything of Oscar Wilde's, because he's very wise and he's also very clever and witty. But he says, morality, that's the way we talk to people we don't like. Right? And you kind of get a feel for it, right? There's something, Ogden Nash, my favorite, not my favorite poet, I like this little ringo. He says, oh, beauty, oh, Judy, morality, right? Oh, Judy, why hast thou not the face of a sweetie and a cutie? Right? I mean, morality seems to come and not be something that we're attracted to. It seems to be something that we think we have to do. Right? I did promise. Right? Not, I did promise. Right? And so, or I have to, not I want to. Right? And so that's a real question. And one thing I think that we need to do is to think I didn't ask you to read this, but we'll take a quick look at it, right? Which which is that we look at Aristotle's list of virtues, right? So the things that he's talking about, let's take a look at them. So they go on for quite a while in books 3 and 4. So if you have just look at the table of contents, you've got courage, oh, yeah, okay. Temperance, control of your appetites, okay. Generosity, yeah. Magnificence, well, we don't know quite what that is. Greatness of soul, we don't know what that is either. And nameless virtue, concerned with small honors. Mild-manneredness, okay, that sounds pretty good. And nameless virtue, that's between being ingratiating and being disagreeable. Truthfulness, okay. Wit. Doesn't sound moral. Or you're not thinking, you know, he's such a moral person. Why do you say it? He's so witty. No, wit, again, doesn't fit. And I think, so one of the things that we want to do is to say, look, we want this notion, right? This one is broader than our notion of morality, insofar as we know exactly what that is. But we usually, we kind of resonate to it, even if we couldn't articulate fully what made something moral. Well, right, that's the kind of broader notion. And one of the things I think you want to think about is this, that if you had all of the virtues that Aristotle lists, and maybe there are more of them, list all of them, these are intended to cover all the aspects of our lives, from eating at one end all the way up to our social engagement with others, to justice and so on. You'd say, these are the things you need if you're going to live a good human life. You want to live well. You want to be a success as a person, you want those. Right? They're not this. If you want to go to heaven, right, you should do these things because these God has enjoined, right? It's not this, you've got to do this because your duty demands it and that's the end of the story. No, these are things that will help you to live well. And if you've got them all, you live really well. Right? And so the thought is, it's a kind of success that's your, not success in the business world, right, in the sense of making a lot of money, but success as a person. Right? So that's what I think pulls it closer to our notion of what might engage our admiration. So we put in admiration courses, right? But admiration is a form of love. It's a form of positive attraction towards something. And see with me? See right? It's a kind of broad. You're thinking, gosh, that's a good person, first of all, and our sense of a morally good person. She won't let you down. She'll keep her promises. She's decent. She's witty. She's fun to be with. All of these things will be included, and she seems, as it were, to stand out as somebody who lives well, the kind of life that we might all want to live, not just in one little area, but globally. That's the thought. Okay. So, three kinds of friendship, right? Friendship directed to this. That goes there. That's the third kind. And then we've got utility as the second kind. And that's attracted to, we'll have to ask, and then pleasure. So three kinds. But we shouldn't think this way. We shouldn't think that if you love someone for their virtue or excellence, there's no pleasure involved or no utility involved. Right? As we go from here to here, we keep good parts of the earlier ones. Right? So after all, it would be silly if you said, yes, such a good person, and I love him, but I don't enjoy spending time with him. Right? That would be weird, right? And the other one is, he's really good. He's got all the virtues. He's a great success in life. I really enjoy being with him, but he never helps me with anything, right? That again would seem like a right defect. So as we move from 1 up to 3, we don't want to think we leave one behind. We rather collect some of the best parts. Okay, so that's the first step. So let's talk about it now that we sort of understand what it is. Tell me about what your thoughts are about it. How do you think? Yeah, that's right. Should we just say a truth has been discovered? Let's move on, find some other truths, or are we going to say anything else? Yeah.
Something that, like, I can't quite
Yeah.
figure out is, it seems like there's a very, very, like, nuanced relationship between the three of these, because they're all sort of very much defined by, like, good, in a sense. So, like, virtue, in this sense, seems like very much oriented towards, like, a certain type of goodness.
Yeah.
But then, utility is almost, like, definitionally about, like, getting some good.
Yeah.
And pleasure also
That's
seems
why I
like...
said there was a kind of question about utility, because of course by itself, it leaves something to be filled in. Useful for what, right? And then what you think, well, something else that's not utility, right? Someone is useful for helping you change the light bulb or some such thing as that. They can't go on. Right? So some other goods are going to be involved in here. And nonetheless, when utility is mostly what you're thinking about, those set of goods tend to get narrowed, right? So you might probably not thinking that someone is useful for helping you to become more virtuous. That's probably not the central thought you have about utility, friends. It's rather about achieving certain kinds of goals and ends where, power for influence, it's not, they're all guidelines. They don't just cut the world up tidily, but that's the idea. Yeah, so they're all related to good, you're right. And what's wrong with that? Why not?
It seems like it might almost be... It might confuse the issue, it seems like. And I realize where he's going with it, but it really does seem like you can always sort of tie them together. With virtue, it gets trickier, but... like.
When you're tie them together, meaning...
So, utility and pleasure, for example, I think I could make an argument why the person who I am friends with for utility is in a very similar way related to pleasure. And I think I know that he's pointing at different things, but it seems like almost a dead...
Think about a case like this. So the reason to keep them apart is, in a sense, not to muddle them up together. So, think of someone that you think of as a real creep. You hate spending time in his company, but he's incredibly influential. And it's really good to keep on his good side. So you swallow down the fact that he's an odious piece of scum, right? In order that you can, just think of all those stories, right? That you have to make up to the Nazi, otherwise your daughter is not going to get out of prison or is going to be sent to prison or some bad thing is going to happen. And so influence and power aren't always pleasant things, right? And on the other hand, there might be somebody who really can't help you with anything at all, right? But they're great fun to be with.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that's Aristotle's thought is, these are different kinds of goods in the world that engage us, and in some friendships, some are more prominent than others. So one of the things I kind of like about it, which won't surprise you, is that, remember we were thinking about love and lust, right? And my reaction was not to want to disparage lust, right? I didn't want to disparage lust by, I'm going to get a new camera person. I didn't want to disparage lust, right, by suggesting that it was just not a kind of love at all. And in the same way, Aristotle doesn't want to disparage completely pleasure friendships because he thinks that's pretty good. You don't stop wanting it. Even if you want this other kind, you still want pleasure, right? So I think that's the thought is to try to kind of let you see, there's something that's very good about a pleasure friendship, And it can be short-lived, but it can be really intense. There can be all kinds of great, you have great fun. These are really important things, but there's more to life than that. Yeah, so that's the reason I think to want to separate them.
That's helpful, yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like this picture doesn't really go far enough
Yeah.
in Aristotle, because he like also makes a very clear distinction between types of people and like how like people's natures sort of like tie into what types of friendship they can have.
Uh-huh.
Like two base people who are concerned
Yeah.
only with like base things,
Yeah.
like can't have a friendship for virtue at all.
Yeah.
And like if they have one or utility or pleasure, it'll usually like destroy them both, because they'll only be concerned with base
Yeah.
things. But then he also has like a couple of other individuals that he talks about in the ethics,
Yeah.
like the great souled man
Yeah.
that he talks about being of
Yeah.
great soul, like the self-lover and the contemplative man.
Yeah.
But it seems like these three like are all tied to one of these more so than the others. Like the contemplative man is never going to want to have really any friendship other than one of virtue, because he is always gazing on it.
But isn't it the case that you can cut into the cake in two different places, right? So one of the thoughts is, well, you could start by thinking that you've got these different kinds of people. The other is you could start out by thinking there are these different kinds of goods towards which we can be oriented in different ways. And so it's quite right. It might be that you could be you might have access, let's call it that, you might have access to one of these goods as a good, and not to another. You don't see the good in it. So it might be that we require a lot of training or cultivation to respond to one of these goods. But then but if we didn't go that way, there would be a thought of, why would you want all that kind of cultivation if it didn't orient you towards something good? So which comes first is a delicate matter, and I think that from Aristotle's point of view, it probably works two ways, right? On the one hand, you have an idea of happiness, that's what we're always trying to achieve, and then you've got another of what kind of beings we are, and that kind of helps us to, so if we were just, as he says, grazing cattle, we really wouldn't need to go any further than the pleasure stuff. Why? Well, we can't go any further. We're just, consumers. We're cattle, we're just eating stuff up, and that's the end of it. So pleasure would be the only one. But we do have elements in us, just as Plato thought, right? One is we care about what other people think of us. And but grazing cattle don't. That's a difference. And then that pops us up. So what about that side of us? How do we satisfy that? And a different one, right? We've got, in addition to that, we've also got our desire to understand the world and ourselves, and, to build human communities that extend our knowledge and so on. We want to take care of that too. Right? But in each of these, right, we have a good that the character makes available, and the justification for having the character is that makes the good available. So you want to go in both ways. You're not wrong, I'm just putting it that way. So this is a good place to start, because it's simple, right? Yeah.
Maybe I'm reading too much
Yeah.
into the example you gave for utility, but
Yeah.
maintaining a
Yeah.
relationship with someone that you cannot stand
Yeah.
for a reason like utility, for whatever, social standard or whatever, doesn't seem like a friendship to me. Maybe because it's by now standards.
Yeah. Well, I think that we might want to distinguish in the group of utility things that are closer to friendship and things that are further away. Right, but these kinds of relationships where, because after all, one of the thought is, odious as the person may be, there's something attractive about them too. Namely, they can help you with these things. And the more persistent that is, the more they're a part of your life, right? I think 19th century novels, great examples, right? There's always the powerful member of the family who is a curmudgeon and nobody likes having that person around. Nonetheless, who's going to inherit the property? And that involves a lot of kissing up to the other person. And maybe, too, one of the thoughts is, it's good to develop a kind of fondness, right? If you're going to have to, So but I quite agree with you. These are spectrums. Hardly anybody is wholly in one category. They're analytic devices, like three parts of the soul in Plato to help us to think. They're not intended to say, ask like this. So would you mostly say you were spirited or repetitive? It's not like that. It's not like, you're not supposed to be assigning people to these categories, right? Yeah.
I was also going to say, in response to your thing, that he does seem to say that like these kind of friendships are like much more fickle, that they're like basically like on and off by the hour or the day, like they kind of form.
Especially the pleasure ones are, but the utility ones are like that too, because
Yeah.
when people stop being useful to each other, if that's the basis. I mean, we often hear this about work friends. So we were great friends when we all worked together, but when we stopped working together, we stopped being friends because what did we have in common? Well, that we shared these experiences. Now we don't share them. Now we don't have them. So they're susceptible to just disappearing when the friends stop playing the role that you want them to play. Whereas, again, the virtue ones, so forth. So, yeah.
I was gonna play a little bit of devil's advocate there, but if
Yeah.
one person kind of, okay, so I guess this is looking at a virtue friendship from a little bit of a utility
Yeah.
standpoint.
Yeah.
So if two people are helping each other
Yeah.
developmentally,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
dialectic, I don't know.
Yeah.
But if at some point one person kind of surpasses the other,
Yeah.
and then they decide that like, well, I like you, but talking to you no longer,
Yeah.
helps me further myself
You're just not
because you're
smart
kind of
enough, Steve.
behind.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't
Yeah,
that
right.
kind of be similar
Yeah.
to the utility thing where like you're not really useful to
Yeah,
me anymore?
yeah. Well, you've put your finger on a problem, and maybe we can try to see how deep going the problem is. So it's very easy to sort of shimmy your way up to the cliff, and then you don't really want to look into the abyss. So we want to, so we have a notion which came up, which was that all of these friendships, all of them, they're all responses to value or goodness. Now, you raised this thing. Well, what happens if we are both virtue friends? So let's start that each one of us responds to the excellence of the other, right? And at this point, we're both equally good, equally excellent. Right? So there's a kind of mirroring that Aristotle will develop when he talks about the friend being an order of self and all these things. But then, one of the two grows much further and surpasses the other. And Aristotle sees that as a real problem. Should the friendship end then? Should the friendship end then? Or the friendships are governed by norms. Look at the norms that apply in the case of utility and pleasure. They're very simple. No more utility, no more friendship. No more pleasure, no more friend. These are the norms, right? So you stop being friends. If the point of your friendship is pleasure and you stop, the pleasure ceases, you stop being friends. Or you ought to stop. You're just being stupid if you go on because there's nothing in it for you anymore. Yeah.
It just seems so unlikely to me that
What seems unlikely?
that
Yeah.
friends of virtue
Yeah.
would, if they are truly excellent
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
that they would have such a discrepancy between themselves and that one. I mean, I feel like it's so. Okay, I feel
Yeah,
like
you're
I'm kind
right.
of cheating because I can
No,
are
you're-
in a different class that like
Yeah.
totally
Yeah.
dealt with this.
Yeah.
But it feels like the contemplative man and like
Yeah.
the friends of virtue are so rare,
Yeah.
and it takes such greatness and excellence that it's like totally. I don't
Yeah.
think it's a real
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. So read the chapter on the great souled man, on the Megalopsuchos. He just looks down on everyone, right? Because, well, he's so terrific. Although I hold the thought though, you're all motoring into territory where, as I say, the abyss opens. So, right, notice that the value or goodness, right, has degrees. So the love should be proportional to, if it's a response to value, right, you see the issue? And your thought is this, right, if I have it right.
Yes.
Wait, I thought you were going to go in one direction, but you went in a different one. But so the direction I thought you were going to go in is you say, gee, somebody who stopped being friends with someone because they stopped being useful, or that doesn't sound too good, right? And then the other one, the way that you went is, well, these are rare and so forth. But I want to say, yes, when you look at the rare cases, what Aristotle says about them, it just gets worse, right? Why? Because, look, here's the Megalopsuchus. I'm going to portray it because I'm good at portraying the Megalopsuchus. Oh, first, I have a deep voice. I have to be a little taller than I am. Sorry about that. I can't do anything. I walk with a steady pace. Like an English gentleman, the ideal. I'm really quite indifferent to my surroundings. It wouldn't be fitting for me to even notice anything, let alone talk to you. But then, I encounter a mirror. And in it, I see something truly worth being friends with. And I stand in front of it and I think, yes. See, in Aristotle, all friendships for others starts with friendship to yourself. And that raises a whole set of issues by itself. But one, and I think it does emerge, is that if friendship is proportional to value, then you love most what's most valuable. And if that's you, you love yourself. But your self-love too should be proportional to your own value. If you're like the Megalopsuchus, you should love yourself all, and other great soul people you should love similarly, right? But you shouldn't. You should proportion your love to the excellence of others, and that means that it goes for you too. How much should you love yourself is to be answered by how worth loving are you? Were you finding a counterexample?
No, I was actually just
Including the section.
where it says the voice is steady.
Yeah. And that, by the way, I mean, the Nicomachean Ethics played a fundamental role in the education of British gentlemen. And so it's not, I didn't just pick them because, they happen to be good, they happen to embody much of them. But if you look at the model of what a British gentleman is, the thought went along with the misinterpretation of the doctrine of the mean, which is you should be moderately a moderato in omnibus. Everything in moderation was the sort of thought. And if someone stood on your toe, you should be moderately angry. And if somebody murdered your wife and children, you should be moderately angry too. Oh dear. Frightful.
Right.
Right, you know these characters, right? I mean, they seem like a certain kind of joke to us, right? Because you think, how could anybody have wanted to be that? But nonetheless, people did, right? So notice, love is proportion to value. Value has degrees, right? So now, love, which is what we're portraying in all of this great scheme. So love is proportional. Should be. Otherwise, it's irrational, right? So you should love most. Yeah. There were a whole lot of hands earlier, so I missed a few. Go ahead, you start.
So, I definitely agree with you that I feel like it would be very unlikely for two people of virtue for one to surpass the other, because again, if they're truly virtuous, they should be having sort of a symbiotic relationship.
So this when they're equal in virtue, or when there's some discrepancy?
When they're close to equal in virtue, I think even if one somewhat surpasses the other, but even if it becomes that huge distinction where one is very clearly more virtuous than the other, isn't that sort of the point? Because friendship isn't necessarily a good need because we are not gods, so that if you do become the most virtuous, then you've achieved that desirable level.
Yeah. So that's a real problem for Aristotle. That's a real problem for him, is that if you get too good, you seem to exit the friendship stakes altogether. But as he kept saying, yes, but you see, because we're human, right? So something else pulls him back in. We never escape. But the thought is, yes, if you could, you would. You would. And he gives all kinds of, for us, rather strange arguments because he feels the pressure. So, for example, one kind of argument that you'll encounter later in Book 9 is friends are like mirrors to the good person. So he says your own actions are very hard to see because you're busy acting, you're not busy looking. But when you see your own actions in another person, that all by itself is a little bit complicated, but when you see another person, right, then you can look at them better and appreciate them. But it's like this, right? So here's the Megalop, Sukhas, or somebody sort of like him, and he sees another person doing judgment. So imagine that, actually he doesn't know, he's looking in the mirror. It's like he's looking in the mirror, right? But he looks and he sees another person doing the kinds of things. He thinks, that's just what I would have done. He looks at it. And then he's better able to study it and appreciate it. He's not absorbed in the action. And that becomes a reason to have friends. Because you want to look at yourself better. And another self enables you to do that, because the reason I just gave, right? You can't simultaneously be acting and spectating your own actions, so you want to have somebody else to spectate. But it goes back to you, though. The point is, it's because you want to see yourself better. Yeah.
Can I just, this is gonna get a
Yeah.
little bit metaphysically swirly,
Yeah.
but like, I'm,
That's okay to handle that. Yeah.
when, at the beginning of the year, we were talking about like how much you can will love,
Yeah.
and like,
Yeah.
what does it mean to like love this much or
Yeah.
this much
Yeah.
or whatever, and so like, specifically when you're saying loving proportionally to
Yeah.
value, like, and he's saying, you know, like in cases of
Yeah.
superiority, like, one should love more than the other,
Yeah.
but like, how do you love more or less or proportionally to someone's
Well,
value? Or
I mean, we do
importance?
talk this way, but you know, so one of the thoughts would be to ask yourself this question, right? What is it that I feel is causing the obstacle to my thinking that love has degrees? Not, right? Right. So on Aristotle, the way you put the question was this way: what is it to love more? What is it to love by degrees? And my response is, so what do you think the obstacle is to loving by degrees? So I'm turning it back to you, but saying, yeah, we do feel something like that. We sometimes think it's an all or nothing thing, and yet at the same time, we also want to say, no, I love so and so more. I love both of them, but not that one as much as this one. And so we have ourselves a kind of degree-like language. What I think it's not so obvious we do is that we have a degree-like language that's proportional to value. Right, so it's a different kind of notion. So that's the thought. So one of the pressures that comes on this, let me give it to you. So this is kind of metaphysical too, but you'll get it. It's this, right? Look, God is infinitely valuable. I mean, our God, whatever that one is, the one we talk about when we talk about God, that one. But if God is infinitely valued, then we have hardly any value at all, right? Because infinite versus any finite amount of value is an infinite distance between those, right? We're worthless. Right? Remember, man, that thou art dust, and unto dust thou shalt return. Right there, right? So if we said God's love of us should be proportional to our value, then be small. Right? Moreover, our love for each other would be small too, because we ought to be like this. If we were Aristotle responding to the Judeo-Christian God, we'd all be like this. And then what would be left over? Well, flakes and fragments at best, right? And that's exactly what the theological problem of God's love for us. That's the form it took. And the response to it was this: God does not love it. God's love for us is not responsive to value. it's creative of value. We are valuable because God loves us, not the other way around, right? So it's a free gift of, so you don't deserve it. You couldn't deserve it, right? Any more than you deserve to go to heaven forever, right? You don't deserve any of that. That's grace and gift. It's not to be understood as merited or responded to. So that by itself is a bizarro notion. I'm just telling you, you can see where it comes from, right? Where do you start? You start love's responsive to value. Next step, there's infinite value. Next step, we don't have much. Next step, God doesn't love us. Well, new notion of love. So, right, that's exactly how it happened. Suddenly, agape, which had just been sitting around there as an unused verb or just as equivalent with philein and eran, right, that came into prominence. It's agape. And what's that? Well, as one good theologian said, that's whatever you want it to be. But here are some things it could be, right? It could be the donation of love to, yeah. Now that's where that went. So now we can backtrack, right? Because I would say to you, look, I think when you think love doesn't come in degrees, one of the things that's happening that you mightn't be aware of is that we're downstream from all that thought about agape. And even if we haven't been reading the latest theological works, our culture, it gives us dim images of that. And when we have it, we think that our human love for another should be a gift too. Not a response to their value, but a gift of, right? The gift of the self, the gift, right? You just freely give up. That's not a response to anything. So not like the blue-footed booby, where the blue foot engages. No, we just freely give it. We're not responding to anything.
That sounds problematic.
Indeed. Yeah, exactly. That's why it's worth. See, we start on one road, we go down that road, we run into an impasse. We can't go further, right? So we backtrack, and we think, okay, we were wrong to take that fork. Let's go back and take the other one. We run into another impasse, and we're like the chicken. We run backwards and forwards between the two, depending on what mood we're in. And if we knew how to solve all these erotic problems, then we'd have what we want. But the thought is, well, it's very difficult to solve them, right? We see how deep they go, right? They go everywhere because we want love to play a lot of different roles in our lives. And what we're not able to do yet is to find a kind of notion that'll do those. Now, you had your hand up earlier.
I did have
Yeah.
my hand up a very long time
Yeah,
ago.
yes, sorry.
I'm not sure if it was
Yeah.
like still
Yeah.
related, but I remember when we were talking
Yeah.
about like the Phaedrus,
Yeah.
about the goods distributed in relationships, and
Yeah.
I was just thinking about how like Aristotle's conception of like proportionality relates to that, because we were talking about like within a couple,
Yeah.
goods should be distributed sort of like in a
Yeah.
quasi-just way, where
Yeah.
like Aristotle is more, again, it's like responsive to value,
Yeah.
so it's like it's.
Well, I think the
it's-
Phaedrus and Plato are kind of similar to Aristotle in this regard. So, we have kinds of love relations that are responses to different sorts of values. That's clearest in Diotima, right? In Diotima, an appetitive engagement with appetitive value is different from an honor-like one for an honor-like value, or a rational one for a rational value. And in the same way, in the symposium, in the Phaedrus, you have these different kinds of love relations depending on what the older lover is attracted to in the boy. So we're going to be Zeus followers or Ares followers and so on. So it's still a notion of responsiveness to value. And in fact, Diotima tells you that right from the get-go. She says, the only thing we want is happiness. The only thing we love. And if you read the Lysis, which is short, it's in there, the sign of, it's kind of hard. But there's one part of the Lysis which is clear. They talk about what he calls the proton philon, the first object of love, the thing that's primarily love, and that's happiness or good. So everything else, it's like this, right? There's God, and why do I love any of you? I see God reflected in you. Different, I see goodness reflected in you. Different, I see beauty reflected in you. Different, I see pleasure, utility, virtue reflected in you. Got it? Now, why don't you like that? Well, maybe you do like it. Yeah.
I mean, like, it kind of is like, I don't actually like you, I like this thing that I
Yeah,
more
that's what it
than
seems
you.
like one word, right? And I think that, so the thought is, if I said this, I want to be loved for myself, right? Then I would think, well, wait a minute, am I simply a source of pleasure? Am I simply a source of utility? Am I just, an embodiment of virtue? Am I just a little bit of happiness for you? Am I just a reflection of God? Are you, yeah.
I think the
Yeah, so that seems to me to be the kind of deep worry about this. Not that we know that we're right, but rather that's where we're feeling the tension, right? Or we should feel the tension. Yeah.
I think that the biggest part where worry comes into it is that, like, if that is the case,
Yeah.
then you start to believe, like, if someone is more beautiful, more
Yeah.
virtuous,
Yeah.
more whatever than I am,
Yeah.
then, like, obviously you'll have more access to that through them,
Yeah.
so you'll choose them over me.
Yeah,
That's
it's
the worry.
this is the way it goes, right? Here's my embodiment of it. You arrive at a party, you notice somebody attractive right out the door, you start talking to them, right? And all the time you're scanning for a little more attractiveness, right? And that, right? And that persists in everything. So, there you are, you're in a relationship, but at the same time, right, you're kind of thinking about trading up. Excuse me a second. Right? That's really not very close to what we think of as the ideal of human relationship, right? Yeah.
But we also talked about at the beginning of the year how
Yeah.
like we can't exactly just track certain qualities or characteristics
Yeah.
which we think we want to respond
Yeah.
to. So I may walk into a party
Yeah.
and find an attractive person,
Yeah.
but then I might feel like a different energy or connection or whatever. You can't really explain it,
Yeah.
and you're responding to someone who's unattractive
Yeah.
but incredibly witty, or
Yeah.
like it
Yeah.
seems less out in our control than
Or just
like,
that magic chemistry which you are completely unable to articulate that just makes you want to talk to this person, though in fact you can see more beautiful ones,
Exactly.
more witty ones, more other things. A different one which you always should have in mind is to put in self-love. I mean, use the love. Always replace love with self-love and ask yourself, what happens if you do that? Right? So think about it this way, right? When the commandment says, love your neighbor as yourself, it's clear that God is not tracking the Nicomachean ethics. Because you can imagine Aristotle saying, well, actually, I don't love myself very much at all because I'm not very valuable. And so you're asking me to love my neighbor, who actually is very valuable, as I love myself. That's really stupid. I should love him much more than I love myself because he's much more valuable than I am. I don't get it. That would be one, or the other way, right? Well, I love myself a lot because I am really valuable. You're asking me to love this worthless person in the way I love myself, but that person has no value at all. I don't get it. Right? That's the thought. But when you put in self-love here, you get some pretty bizarro results too. Namely, I should love you more than I love myself if you're better. I should love myself proportioned to my value. Otherwise, it's just nonsense. Yeah. Yes? You have a question.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
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 Not because it's boring. I'm just
Okay, got it. All right.
wait, what was I gonna say? Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I think the way around that is kind of he talks about like when you're talking about matters of virtue and that kind of thing, and friendship between.
When you're
talking about matters of
fast in
virtue.
my ear, yeah.
Sorry, when you're talking about matters of virtue and friendships between people of
Yeah.
equal value. The example he gives is like a father and a child.
Yeah.
So there is room for that kind of relation, because it's not a question of, there's never a question of repayment.
Well, if you thought of it that way, but I mean, so the thought is, right, that the child should love, these are unequal friendships, and those cause problems for Aristotle, precisely because love is supposed to be proportional to value, right? So otherwise you wouldn't be disturbed by it. I mean, suppose, for example, you have a love as a free gift of some sort. Well, you're not thinking at all that there's anything problematic about the difference in statuses of these. Anybody can give anybody a gift, so to speak, right? And so you're not worried about it. But as soon as you get to the thought that there are inequalities, then inequalities pose problems for friendship. So, you find Aristotle giving you kind of this sort of advice. You used to be friends, and you had a lot in common, and a long history, and you've just outgrown that person. What should you do? Well, be kind. I mean, don't, right? Remember, too, that there's that kind of value, the value of the past. How long should you preserve and then you think something like this. Well, if the other person is worth having being friends with, they'll just recognize how superior you are, and they won't want to be friends with you anymore. Right? Because they'll just think, oh, so friendship is a complicated kind of equality, precisely because if it isn't, there are going to be problems. I'll be thinking of myself as something like this. Why do you want to be friends with me when you're so valuable and I'm so not? And that's going to be a problem for me, right? Because I will think there's something the matter when you don't love according to worth. So that if you seem to love me, when I see that you've got much more worth than I do, then it's going to seem pathological, right? In just the way that it would be if somebody, took less than their salary or something, right? You'd want to understand, why are they doing that? Here's the source of more happiness. Why are they settling for less? That would be irrational. Yeah.
Well, in that situation, if the person who's questioning the judgment is less in whatever way, it could be that, like, the more reasonable person is seeing something else in them, or something that they can't see about themselves.
Oh, that would be, that seems possible too, right? That is, but then it would be, right, susceptible to the following, right? So the lesser one says to the greater one, so to speak, I don't see what you see in me, because I say, well, here's what I see in you, right? And there should be a possibility of kind of consciousness raising and epiphany and a kind of, but notice that if that doesn't happen, right? If it persists that you can't be brought to the point where you understand that indeed there is equality of value, you just weren't fully aware of it, then again there's a problem in the friendship. So that's a good point. A part of it can be educating the other person to see value better, in which case they'll see their own value